Time is pressing. Time is fleeting. Christmas time, breakfast time, time to go, Time magazine. Life is filled with a constant awareness of time. Time is ubiquitous, and yet time does not really exist. Even if it did, humans do not possess sensory receptors to detect time, because time has no physical mass, no chemical structure, no electrical energy. Scientists, philosophers, and astronomers have debated the nature of time since, well, the beginning of time. Newton believed that time exists independently, progressively moving ever forward. Einstein famously proposed that time was not absolute. Instead, it changed relative to the observer. Regardless of how time is defined, time is clearly perceived. So how is this possible? One answer is that the perception of time is a neural construct, a mechanism the brain uses to process sensory information, resulting in a sense of time. This perception of time, the way that time feels to the observer, is a result of the brain's best effort to accurately represent the world using the only information it receives, sensory signals, and the order with which those signals arrive. Time and sensory perception are intricately related, which means that the way time is experienced can be dynamic, providing the ability to perceive speed, duration, order of events, and changes in time. Information about the world relies on sensory data, collected and processed from among each of the different senses. While multisensory input provides richness of perceptual information, it also creates a complicated challenge for the brain. Vision, hearing, and touch all have independent afferent pathways, causing signals to be processed at different speeds and in different areas of the brain. So how is the brain able to perceive an event, created by multiple sensory signals reaching the brain at different times, as a single unified event? For example, simply knocking on a door produces a tactile stimulus, an auditory knock, and the visual image of a hand striking a door. As it turns out, the brain will automatically try to synchronize signals arriving at different times, as long as these signals are within a temporal window, approximately 80 to 100 milliseconds of one another. Known as temporal binding, this is the brain's way of assigning the correct timing to events in the world. To test the neural mechanism behind temporal binding, study participants were asked to press a button which caused a light to flash just after a short delay. While the brain understands that the button press is clearly causing the flash, the time delay interrupts the typical pattern of cause and effect. However, within about 10 button presses, the brain begins to ignore this delay, and participants began to perceive the button press and the flash as occurring simultaneously. This study demonstrates the brain's neuroplasticity, constantly readjusting based on repeated experiences with the world in order to better interact with the world. So how then does the brain know not to associate a sound heard 5 minutes ago with an event occurring right now? One hypothesis is that the brain waits for the slowest sensory signal to arrive before processing the information. This is how a simultaneous touch to the foot, requiring more time to travel up to the brain, and a touch to the face, with a shorter travel time to the brain, are felt as though they are occurring at the same time. The brain's representation of time can be heavily influenced by visual input. This means that temporal perception, of course, is vulnerable to the same influences as visual perception and may not always represent sensory reality. A very simple example of this is demonstrated by the back and forth eye movements known as saccades. Eye movement tends to occur in quick bursts, tens of milliseconds in duration. Visually, the brain ignores the sensory input created during eye movement. The world does not appear blurry between each eye movement, thereby producing the experience of a seamless image. Likewise, during the approximately 80 milliseconds that pass when blinking, the world is not filled with perceptible blackness. The same effect appears to happen during the perception of time. Numerous studies demonstrate that the time it takes to look back and forth between two objects is consistently underestimated, because although saccades are actual physical motions that take time to occur, the brain ignores them, not counting them toward the overall perceived time. Like other neural constructs, time perception is both influenced and can therefore be manipulated by the sensory signals it receives from the environment. Similar to vision or hearing, this means that time perception is also susceptible to sensory illusions. For example, the present is a psychological illusion. Only the past and the future really exist. All signals reaching the brain, though experienced as the present, in reality occurred before the signal even began its journey toward the brain. Neural time lag means that the present reality is actually created by signals from the past. One dynamic illusion created by this process is known as the flash lag effect. One version of the flash lag effect is produced by the linear movement of a ring, accompanied by a simultaneous flash filling the center of that ring. The stimulus hitting the retina is of a flash occurring in the center of the ring, but the perceptual experience results in a visual delay. The flash actually appears to occur slower, lagging behind the ring. Other studies demonstrate that objects appearing to move closer will appear longer in duration than objects moving away. Still, other studies have found that larger, brighter, or greater numbers of stimuli also create temporal duration distortions. Probably the most widely studied example of temporal illusions is known as chronostasis, or the stopped clock illusion. Chronostasis refers to the phenomenon of the second hand on a clock appearing to pause upon first glance. This is believed to be the brain's way of accounting for the saccade by filling in the missing time with the most logical information, and numerous studies have demonstrated the increased effect on temporal perception. Temporal illusions are also frequently demonstrated by the oddball effect, where a series of repeating images are flashed over and over in succession, remaining on the screen for the same duration of time. Occasionally, a new image appears at random. Despite this new image remaining on screen for the same amount of time, participants experience it as lasting longer. Known as expansion of time, the neural mechanisms involved remain inconclusive, but there are two predominant hypotheses. The first hypothesis attributes the effect to increasing brain activity in response to a novel stimulus, a vestigial remnant of the flight or fight response. The theory is that new sensory information requires more processing by the brain than familiar stimuli. Basically, more data requires more time to process, stretching out the perception of time. A newer theory is that the effect is caused by a decrease in neural activity during the repetitive images, a result of the brain's pattern recognizing efficiency. If all sensory input were to disappear, would the sense of time disappear as well? The answer is believed to be no. Somewhere within the darkness of the mind, the internal monologue would still be ticking, perceiving time in some form, an indication that the perception of time may also have a neural component. Using high-speed fMRI techniques, brain scans of participants performing time duration tasks point to timekeeping mechanisms located in the cerebellum and cerebral cortex. New research has also found evidence of timekeeping mechanisms within the brain's right parietal cortex and basal ganglia. These findings are supported by studies of impaired time perception in stroke patients with damage to the right parietal lobe. Complex neural mechanisms means that time perception can vary significantly between individuals. However, time perception is not limited to humans. It also appears to vary significantly between species. One study demonstrates that animals vary in their perception of time in proportion to metabolic rate, meaning that larger animals perceive time faster than smaller animals. To test this, they calculated the speed of visual processing using flicker rate. Dogs, for example, processed visual information at a rate of 80 Hz, which is the reason they can so easily see and catch a tennis ball in midair. Compared to humans, canines experience time much more slowly, perceiving a greater number of events within the same period of time. In another study, rats, trained to perform a 12-second timing task, demonstrated the effect that chemical influences can have on time perception. Under the influence of cocaine, marijuana, or a saline control, the rats performed the timing task at 8 seconds, 16 seconds, and 12 seconds respectively. Not only does this research indicate a demonstrable chemical effect on perceived time duration, but also indicates a clear perception of time by other species. Apart from successfully timing when a baseball will cross the plate, or when to arrive at work, or how long it will take to cross the street before an approaching car, how important is accurate time perception? Recent studies indicate that temporal processing may be more important than once thought. Schizophrenia is one area that may directly benefit from studies of sensory time perception. A feature of this condition is credit misattribution, which researchers suggest could be the result of temporal misperception, a symptom also found in conjunction with Parkinson's disease, ADHD, and possibly even dyslexia, autism, and Alzheimer's. Experiments exposing schizophrenic patients to the oddball effect have found that they do not experience the illusion. Instead, every image is perceived as novel. Internal timing may also be involved in the experience of hallucinatory voices, possibly an order reversal of thought and internal monologue. Some neurologists believe that this information could be useful in developing screening tests or even as a therapy tool to improve symptoms. Clearly, the brain uses the perception of time to act within the world. Almost every sensory signal relies on temporal processing. The brain's perception of time has been shown to be flexible, adaptable, and dynamic in an effort to provide the most accurate representation of the world. While the complete neurobiology of the brain remains inconclusive, research into the perception of time offers a unique insight into the brain's neural mechanisms, and maybe even a deeper understanding of time itself.